There is a fundamental realignment occurring in global trade, and the numbers tell a story that demands our attention. A significant shift in strategy is underway, one that is altering the dynamics of the US-China trade war. The United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been a vocal critic of Beijing's practices. He has publicly accused China of wielding export controls as a strategic weapon, issuing stark warnings that such actions threaten to destabilize global markets and critical supply chains. His statements, closely watched in Washington and international financial circles, were a clear signal that the US was prepared to escalate its economic pressure. This rhetoric exists against the backdrop of a protracted trade conflict, a battle fought with tariffs on hundreds of billions in goods and strategic controls on sensitive technology and critical materials. The stated American objective has been to constrain China's influence and secure greater leverage. However, the anticipated outcome has not materialized. In a striking countermove, China's exports have not contracted, but have instead surged. While American pressure intensified, Chinese exporters executed a rapid pivot, redirecting shipments from the US to markets across Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is not merely a reactionary bump, it is a demonstration of strategic resilience. China's export engine has continued at a formidable pace, cushioning the impact of US tariffs and, crucially, strengthening Beijing's hand in international negotiations. In sectors like technology and electronics, Chinese exports are reaching record levels, actively offsetting losses in American markets. This creates a stark tension between American rhetoric and economic reality. The US strategy relied on the assumption that economic pressure would force concessions. Instead, China's ability to cultivate global demand elsewhere highlights the limitations of unilateral coercion. We are witnessing a recalibration of global trade flows that challenges long-held assumptions about economic leverage. The underlying strength of China's industrial infrastructure cannot be overstated. Even under scrutiny, its manufacturers are operating at high capacity, swiftly adapting to shifting demand. This surge is underpinned by careful planning, the diversification of logistics, the strengthening of regional trade agreements, and competitive pricing strategies. This multi-layered approach ensures that Chinese goods maintain their global reach, illustrating a level of economic agility that is reshaping the contours of this conflict. The rhetoric from Washington has been stark. Scott Bessent's accusation that Beijing is weaponizing export controls, framed as pointing a bazooka at global supply chains, was a deliberate and serious warning. The message was clear: restricting access to critical materials, such as rare earth elements, poses a direct threat to global economic stability. These minerals are not mere commodities. They are the bedrock of modern industry, essential for everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced defense systems and renewable energy technology. Any significant disruption to their supply would send immediate shockwaves through global markets, triggering shortages, driving up prices, and stalling production worldwide. Bessent's critique elevated this beyond a simple trade dispute, framing it as a strategic gambit with the power to reshape global commerce itself. In this high-stakes contest, nations primarily wield two tools: export controls and tariffs. Export controls restrict the flow of strategically vital goods, while tariffs are taxes designed to make imports less competitive. The United States deployed these measures under a core strategic assumption that China's economy, heavily reliant on both exports and a global supply of essential raw materials, was uniquely vulnerable to such pressure. The objective was to leverage this dependency, to slow China's economic growth, force political concessions, and reinforce American primacy in setting the rules of international trade. This was a policy designed not merely for economic protection, but to control the levers of global power by dominating the channels for critical technologies and resources. However, the most recent data reveals a strategic miscalculation. In September 2025, defying analyst projections, China's global exports surged by 8.3%. This growth was not fueled by the American market, but in spite of it, while shipments to the United States fell precipitously by 27%, a direct consequence of tariffs and regulatory pressure. This was entirely offset by a dramatic surge in exports to the European Union Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Through a combination of existing trade partnerships, competitive pricing, and strategic pragmatism, Chinese industry successfully pivoted, finding eager buyers for its electronics, machinery, and consumer goods elsewhere. This diversification represents a fundamental shift in the trade war's dynamics. It demonstrates a critical flaw in the theory of unilateral economic coercion. When a target nation can successfully cultivate alternative markets, the leverage of the imposing power is significantly diminished. The American strategy, predicated on China's dependency, is now confronting a new and more complex reality. A reality where Beijing has demonstrated a formidable capacity to adapt and redirect its economic influence on a global scale. What we are witnessing is a masterclass in economic statecraft. Chinese industry has executed a strategic pivot of remarkable scale and speed. By leveraging established trade agreements and competitive pricing, they have aggressively expanded their reach. Southeast Asia has seen a pronounced uptake of Chinese machinery and electronics, while markets in Africa and Latin America are absorbing growing volumes of manufactured goods, textiles, and consumer products. Crucially, even the European Union has demonstrated a sustained appetite for Chinese technology components and industrial equipment. This is not a random shift. It is a deliberate and successful diversification of China's global trade footprint. This strategic maneuver has effectively blunted the force of American tariffs and threats. By spreading its exports across multiple regions, China has systematically reduced its dependency on any single market, thereby insulating itself from unilateral economic pressure. The agility displayed by Chinese businesses is notable. They have rapidly adjusted supply chains, reconfigured logistics, and cultivated new buyers in emerging markets. This resilience has allowed them to maintain growth despite significant geopolitical headwinds. This export surge underscores a critical point. China retains substantial influence in the global economy, irrespective of political friction with the United States. It demonstrates the strategic value of market diversification as a defensive shield against economic coercion. While the US remains an important market for high-value goods, China's ability to pivot has sustained its overall trade momentum, protected key industries, and reinforced its position as a dominant commercial power. This trend signals a longer-term structural shift, where reliance on a single major market is increasingly seen as a strategic vulnerability. In response, Scott Bessent's rhetoric has been characteristically firm, publicly condemning Beijing's use of export controls and warning of global consequences. He signalled a readiness for further escalation, framing China's actions as an aggressive weaponization of trade. Yet the empirical data tells a different story. Despite these warnings, China's global exports have continued to thrive. The dramatic decline in shipments to the United States has been counterbalanced by surging exports elsewhere. This reality has fundamentally weakened the leverage Washington hoped to exert. China's response reveals a deeper strategic calculation. By diversifying its markets, it has turned a potential confrontation into a strategic opportunity, strengthening ties with emerging economies and leveraging global demand, all while reducing its risk of overdependence on the United States. This has reshaped the entire narrative of the trade war. The United States, which sought to use economic pressure to dictate terms, now finds its influence diminished. The very tools of coercion, tariffs and export controls, have seen their efficacy decline as global demand for Chinese products persists. This situation challenges a core tenet of modern economic statecraft: the limits of unilateral pressure in a globalized, multipolar world. China's economic agility has demonstrated that in contemporary trade conflicts, success is no longer solely determined by the imposition of restrictions, but by the capacity to navigate global markets and maintain growth under pressure. The balance of power is shifting, not through grand declarations, but through the relentless and strategic rerouting of commercial traffic. The battlefield has moved, and adaptability has proven to be a far more potent weapon than threat alone.